I'm sorry, are we live?
Yes, we are.
Great. Would you like to go ahead and I'll call the meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair DuBois,
Here.
Council Member Philseff.
Here.
Vice Member Koo. Here. All present. Thank you.
Great. Our first order of business is oral communications. It's a place for members of the public to speak to something not otherwise on the agenda. So will the clerk help me, I guess, if there are people that would like to speak? I don't see any hands, do you? Okay. So we have one item tonight to review of the business registry and the business improvement district for fiscal year 2023. Director Noze, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Chair DuBois. Good evening, Finance Committee, Kylie Noze, Administrative Services Director. And online, we have David Ramberg, our Assistant Director, who will actually do the PowerPoint for this. We also have Charlie Whiteance from the Chamber, as well as I believe Brad Ahikian is here as well for support, both in association with the downtown BID. David?
Thank you, Kylie. I'll switch over to my screen share here and hopefully we'll get that going. Look okay? Great. Thank you, Kylie, and good evening, Chair and members of the Finance Committee. My name is David Ramberg with the Administrative Services Department. Tonight, we are bringing forward to the committee a review and a recommendation, request for a recommendation regarding the process, the fiscal year 2023 process for the Business Registry Certificate Program and the Downtown Business Improvement District Program. I will start with a slide of background just to kind of catch us all up to where we are. The Business Registry Certificate Program began in 2015 as a way to collect information and data from businesses to help inform city programs and policies. Well before that, in 2004, the Business Improvement District had previously been established. The Downtown Business Improvement District was established to offer businesses in the downtown to contribute and to benefit from additional business-focused services and programs in the downtown area. The business registry and BID cycles are combined. Nowadays, they are combined into one process, which is handled online. That process typically starts in the March timeframe and runs through the June timeframe. And through that period, businesses can establish an account if they're a new business, or enter their existing account and process a new business registry and a new business improvement district assessment if they are a business in the downtown. During COVID, both of these programs were paused. So if you recall, going back to fiscal year 2020, the council the council refunded what had already been paid for fiscal year 2020 for both BRC and BID, and then in fiscal year 21 and in fiscal year 2022, both programs were put on pause and no fees or no assessments were collected during those years. The caveat to that is last year, for fiscal year 2022, the Business Registry Certificate Program, the council agreed to modify that program slightly, continue to make it a no fee registration program for those businesses that registered by the due date last year. That was July 15th. And for businesses that registered after that due date, there was a full fee required. Both programs, as I mentioned earlier, are managed online. The system for the programs is provided by Avenue, which is a vendor for the city. They also provide customer support to businesses that need assistance with navigating the program and getting their registrations completed. Moving on to the next slide brings us to the core of what we're here to discuss with the committee tonight, which is really recommendations for both programs. Coming out of the last couple of years of being in pause and modified status for both programs, we wanted to bring forward to the committee and to council really a discussion about how ideas of moving forward, ranging from a complete restart of both programs possibly to some variations of that. And I will walk through three options for each of these programs that are really just suggestions and offerings to get everyone's thinking started, so to speak. So for the Business Registry Certificate Program in fiscal year 2023, for the fiscal year 2023 cycle, option one would be to resume the program with the existing timeline, the existing structure, and essentially no changes to the existing process whatsoever. So we would essentially send out notices that the registry program is starting up, and they would be due in the April-May timeframe. Option two would be to move forward with the Business Registry Certificate Program, but modify the questions to make the questionnaire and the registration process more more streamlined and smoother for the businesses that are registering. There has been comments in the past that it is a bit of a laborious process. We do ask a lot of questions and collect a lot of information. So what this would allow us, option number two, is really streamline that registration process down to just the essential information that we would need to support heading into what will be potentially a new business tax, which, if approved by the voters, would supplant the Business Registry Certificate Program. This would also, option two would also be in alignment with some of the learning we had from the COVID-19 business support programs that we rolled out. On to option number three. Option number three would continue to pause the Business Registry Program for another year, resume it in fiscal year 2024. This would allow staff and council, all of us essentially, to review what might be some changes coming from a potential business license tax if approved by voters, and to think through and build out that new system, and essentially put the BRC on pause until then. Moving on to options for the Business Improvement District, I do want to point out one misprint on this slide. Option number three is a repeat of option number two. I will speak to option number three. It is in your CMR correctly, so apologize for that. Option number two for the bid is to proceed with the existing process and the existing timeline, similar to the BRC, really just go forward as usual for the bid with the full assessment and so forth. The wrinkle here and the potential caveat here is, as of the printing of the staff report, we have heard from the Palo Alto Downtown Business and Professional Association. They are the entity that currently manages the bid, that they may not want to go forward with management of the bid in the current fiscal year 2023 cycle, if we were to move forward with that. So we would need to probe that a little bit further, and I believe we can have potentially some of that discussion here tonight. For option number two, under the bid, we would continue to pause the bid in fiscal year 2023, as we have for the past two fiscal years, in anticipation of resuming the program in fiscal year 2024. What this would enable us to do is to explore further possible changes in the management of the Business Improvement District. As I mentioned just a moment ago, the Palo Alto Downtown Business and Professional Association may want to get out of the management of the bid, and there has been initial conversations between that entity and the Chamber of Commerce about potentially moving forward under a new management of the bid. So this option number two would give us time to flush that out and establish a new path forward. Option number three apologize again, it's misprinted here, but it would essentially be a hybrid of option number 1 and option number 2. Really, this would resume the bid in fiscal year 2023. It would resume it, however, without a management agreement in place with any entity. We believe the city council can make that move unilaterally without a management contract in place. And one option here for the committee's consideration is that if we do resume with the assessment, it's conceivable that we could have an assessment at a lower amount for this one particular year. So that's just one option to consider as part, or one alternative to consider as part of option 3. What option 3 would continue to enable us to do, similar to option number 2, is really explore the path forward on management of the bid during that period of time, while collecting some amount of revenue to have revenue on hand for when a new management path forward would be established. So programs could theoretically get off the ground with some amount of funding at that time. So moving on to the recommendation that we have brought forward to the committee tonight. I'll read the formal recommendation in your staff report is that the Finance Committee make recommendations to Council direction regarding the fiscal year 2023 Business Registry Certificate Program and the Downtown Business Improvement District renewal process. And what we have here on slide 5 is a possible draft motion for the committee's consideration. And I'll leave it there, showing you option 2 and option 3 for the bid, and move on to conclude the presentation and be happy to take any questions or discussions that you may have as the committee. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to suggest, since we only have one item tonight, that we break up the business urgency discussion and then the bid discussion. So why don't we start with the business registry? If there are any technical questions from the council members, let's get questions out, and then we'll go to the public, and then we'll come back for discussion. So Lydia, Eric, do you have any just questions about the registry? Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for the report. I was just wondering, the business registry and bid application forms, do the merchants have to fill it out every year, the same 9 pages, or since they're already there, is there a just update information file form?
Right. Very good question. We do ask for renewed information every year. Businesses can log into their account online and fill out the application, but we do ask for a refresh of the information that's contained in there. They do have an account number that's attached to their application, so they don't have to re-register in the system per se, but they do have to complete a new process each year.
Okay, so it wouldn't be as laborious. It's the first step that makes it very long process, but afterwards it gets a lot more easier. It's just updating information. Then for the bid,
Well, let's come back. We'll come back to the bid.
Okay, I'm
Is that
sorry.
okay?
Yeah, that's right.
Eric, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just quick question. I mean, it's a little bit qualitative here, but we collect a lot of information on the business registry. How much of it, having done this for a few years, how much of it do we actually use? A little, a lot, somewhere in between?
Yeah, that's a good question, council member. It is probably somewhere in between. We certainly had intentions and ambitions for a very extensive collection of information, and we have used that to different levels over the years. Most recently, a department contacted me about an upcoming study that they have that they are planning for, and wanted to understand what sort of information was in the system for their potential use. The data has also been used for informing transportation programs and other efforts such as that. But I would say it's more in the in-between line. One of the comments from council in years past has been to do outreach and find additional beneficial uses for the data that we do collect. And so that was going to be a next step to build out and enhance the BRC process. But right now it's somewhere in between, like you said.
Okay. So, I mean, since we collect it every year, if we pared it down, I mean, having some idea now which things we use, if we pared it down now, if we found other applications that would require additional data, we could always put some back in future years, right? Because they redo it every year.
That's correct. It's an online form that takes some adjustment by avenue, and that usually takes a month or so, depending on the nature of the changes. And
Okay.
Once they roll those changes out, then it would be in place. And so yes, we can add things or subtract things.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So it sounded like in the staff report that the fastest path was not changing anything. So you're saying take about a month to just delete questions, simplify it?
Right. Every year there is a little bit of new setup just to get the new dates in the system and any changes to any of the fees or how the fees are applied. So that's kind of routine for every year. We usually look several weeks to a month just to get that piece done. If we were to remove questions or make modification questions, we would anticipate a little bit further. That would be something along the lines of option number 2, would take a little bit longer, but just to start up what we have, we would work with Avenue and just do a standard refresh and relaunch.
Chair Du Bois, one thing to just remember is the changes to the online form. City staff actually are not the ones who are doing it. It would be the consultant. So we are working with their timelines. And so these are the timelines that they provided us. So there's a little bit less flexibility than if it were our own site.
Got it. Okay. Let's see if any members of the public would like to comment. If you would, please raise your hand. Again, I'm not seeing anybody. I do see Charlie here with the chamber. Maybe you're waiting for the bid. Yep. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about the registry and which option. I mean, I guess I'd jump in and just say that, I remember when we established the registry, we were getting, council was being asked to make decisions that were really impacting the business community. And we didn't really have any good sources of information. So that's how this originated in the first place. Just answering questions like how many companies are there in Palo Alto, how many employees, how much square footage, how are they commuting, that kind of stuff. So, I had a couple of thoughts on this. I do think this is a good dry run for the business tax, assuming the business tax passes. But I would say even with the business tax, the goals would be there that it's just not about collecting data to be able to tax people. I think that the city would still want to have some information. And so I would just say the kind of way I was leaning was maybe just deploying it as is. I think we typically started in March, so we're going to be behind if we try to simplify it or change it. And we've just gone through COVID where we've had a huge amount of change and we have no information. So I think not doing it is an option. I think we really, it'd almost be irresponsible not to do it this year. I think we want to figure out what our business community looks like and collect some of that data. So those are just my initial thoughts, would be actually to go with option 1 and just get it out there and start the process. And I do know COVID has hit certain businesses pretty hard. I mean, other people had pretty good year. I feel like the $50 fee is pretty minimal. And I think, as a city, we should look at cost recovery. And so I would say, if we do the registry, we should go ahead and resume the $50 fee as well. Eric?
Well, that's similar in spirit with, I think it's time we start. I mean, there's no guarantee the business tax is going to pass. It's time we start getting back to normal on stuff, and this being one of them. That said, if the business community is complaining that we have this giant, 100-page survey, it's not 100 pages, okay, but this long survey, and we're not using some of the information on it and stuff like that, and they'd like to see it simplified, I think we ought to listen to that. And it's been off for however many, a couple of years here, right? A month probably going to make a huge difference. Unless it's a huge amount of staff work, I'm loath to pile staff up with busy work. But if it's not too big a deal, I sort of lean option two. Just because, we're getting feedback that this thing is too complicated to fill out. I think we should listen.
Thank you. I kind of looked at the application form, and there were a lot of questions that were very informative to the city. And actually, while it is 9 pages, it's actually 4 pages where you filled out and 5 pages of information of the fees and what to do and how to fill out the form and so forth. So really, it's 4 pages, and there are really good information that the city should be gathering. In light with the the grand jury report that we discussed yesterday, as well as all the laws that's coming out in terms of jobs and housing, I think it's actually prudent that we track all of this and monitor it and have an idea of what businesses are here in Palo Alto. It would be helpful in the long run to know exactly, what types of jobs we have. So I do think that we do need to go back and implement this. And if the fastest way is, option 1 and 2 are basically similar, except that they want to, in option 2, readdressing the questions, which I actually don't think is necessary. So if the faster method is to do option 1, then that might be the way to go. Also, with regards to the fees, I know staff came up with a really good method of collecting the fees with the register by July 15th and not pay it, but anything after to do so. I actually think that if it's not done by July, everybody should pay, but if it's not done by July, that the penalties gets assessed, and I think the penalties is $2 to $25. If I'm not confusing it with the bid.
correct. Yes, you're correct.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. So that's my thoughts.
So was that last year? I thought it was originally like $50 to register and then $50 if you were late, so it doubled. But then did we change it recently?
We have not changed it, the late fee that is, and it's a $25 initial late fee, and then the $25 gets applied again if they are late for essentially the second due date. So there's sort of 2 tiers of lateness, put it that way. So it can accumulate to a full $50 late fee, depending on how late they are.
And Lydia, if you were going to shorten the form, were there any questions you would drop?
No, actually, no. Because it asks about how the employees are coming into work, if there are rides provided. And those are all information that we want to know due to VMT and all of that. And the rest is just, registering their business.
So with this consulting company, it's Avenue, I guess is the name. Are they, were they also cleaning up the data that we got? Was that part of their contract?
It is part of their contract. It's part of the discovery services that is built into the contract. The discovery services, in addition to cleaning up the data, they do outreach to businesses to ensure that businesses that either are that haven't registered or that are possibly brand new get into the system, and then there's also a follow-up in terms of any unpaid, fees at that time. We the last 2 years we've put that exercise on pause as well during COVID, just to not add an additional layer of burden to businesses. So we would restart that process, the discovery process, and it would go through and validate additionally validate the data and add any unregistered businesses to the database as well.
And just one point to add to Mr. Ramberg's response, although we didn't necessarily do specific discovery work while the pandemic was going on, we did ensure that we were incentivizing businesses to register as part of the program to make it an eligible qualification for things like tenant, rent forgiveness, or for the business grant program. So we did do our best to make strides in the efforts of getting more businesses obviously enrolled in and registered, just short of taking the more kind of targeted approach of from a discovery perspective.
And so are they emailed or mailed if they're late?
So they are emailed, but the primary means of communication is through physical mail. That has through Avenue's experience, and they do this for a lot of cities. The physical mail is still the best way to get a response, but there is an email option. We certainly do collect email addresses as part of the data collection.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just sounds like a good process. Physical mail. It sounds like, during COVID, we were actually getting this nailed down. And I guess the other thing I wanted to say was, I would expect this process to merge into the business tax, assuming it does pass. But even then, like I was saying, I think the information is useful. So as we think about the business tax, I think we should think about collecting data for tax exempt companies, as part of that process, or how would we handle that? So I'm going off of memory in terms of the data we're collecting. Lydia, I'm impressed you went and looked. Eric, did you have any more thoughts based on what Lydia said?
Let me ask you, actually, can I ask a question? If it's unanimous, does this go on consent, or is it going to be an action item?
I would say if it was unanimous to put it on consent.
We'll have to look at that. It may be based on regulations in terms of adopting one of the resolutions. I can't remember if it's the bid or the BRC has to be action because it would be a public hearing potentially, but we would take the path of following your procedures, but meeting the noticing requirements.
I'm getting the impression it might influence Councilmember Filseth's vote, depending if it needs to be an action item or not. So do we have clarity?
Yeah, we really should take time to look at that.
You want to look at it while we maybe go into the bid, or?
Well, it's not necessarily that simple.
Okay. Okay.
We should be careful with the procedures. So I think we can't give you a definitive answer tonight.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like one of them maybe, but we're not sure. Have to go to council anyways. So I guess I'll go ahead and make the motion that we would just proceed with option 1 on the business tax. And then I guess I heard different opinions on whether we should just charge the $50 or do it for no charge this year again. Again, my feeling is it's actually like a pretty swift recovery for a while, and $50 is not that much. And that actually the cost recovery part for the city is important. But so I guess I would make the motion that we resume, with the fee. So it'd be just option 1 and delete I there. Is there a second or,
I'll second.
and then do we need to discuss anymore? Should we just vote? Okay.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
So for the BRC with no changes for FY 2023, are we going to go back to what we did last fiscal year where there's no charges up to,
Well, I was saying no. I was saying there would be a charge.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, then good. We're
Okay.
good.
All right. Not seeing any hands. So Councilmember Koo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Councilmember Philseth?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. Okay, so let's move on to the bid. Again, are there any council questions on the bid? Yeah, go ahead.
So if there is nope, if we don't resume the bid, and because there's a delay of management, that would just mean that there would be less events, less enhancements with the area, right? Because the bid is the one that pays for a lot of, I mean, through the assessments, that's what pays for the events on the streets and so forth.
Well, the bid is ultimately an assessment. It's a tool for a group within a geo area of businesses to essentially pool their resources and invest back in that same area. So ultimately, it really is the business's money. And so every year, the organization that managed the downtown bid would bring forward a budget with expected activities for the coming year that the proceeds would be spent on. So from that perspective, yes, if we were to put the bid on pause for another year, there wouldn't be those resources for those businesses in the downtown core within the bid geo area to spend on. I would say many people support events. So the ones that perhaps you're referencing or thinking of may or may not have been a bid sponsored event. But I do know that they used to do like the summer concert series, I think, in downtown as one of the events that they supported.
I mean, my thought is, by delaying it, it actually doesn't enhance the area, that boundary area. And so it brings in less people, and with the events and all the enhancements that this assessment does, it actually helps revive the area. So I guess they don't want to move forward, correct?
Sure, and I think if at the chair and committee's leisure, we do have Charlie Whiteance here from the chamber to help us with this conversation, since ultimately on the bid side of things, we as the city will help administer it. But then the bid we typically contract with someone to operate and spend the money basically.
And it's the PADBPA that is the management, and they're the ones who.
Historically, it has been, yes. But as Mr. Ramberg said, they have identified that they would like to step back from that role. And so there's a gap in terms of who would necessarily manage.
Step back is not dissolve.
No, we would have to take proceedings to actually dissolve the bid itself. But there is a correlation between charging an assessment and having someone there to allocate those funds and do improvements. So something for your consideration if there isn't necessarily a management company set up. That's why staff tried to outline a few different options in terms of, there is that outstanding to do of figuring out who would manage.
So didn't the downtown business district propose the budget and the events, and then the council would basically approve it, but it was kind of led by them? So under staff's option 3, how would the money be spent if there's nobody kind of driving it?
Right. So ultimately, it wouldn't be spent until we establish a contract with someone to manage the bid. And so we would leave those funds. They're dedicated, they're restricted. And so ultimately, as we work out what the future looks like in terms of management of the bid, they would be there and ready to kickstart. So it's one option. Obviously, if we were to figure out the management structure in 2 months, this would ensure that there's some level of seed funding to help them start in 2 months, as opposed to waiting 9 to 12 months before another cycle hits, kind of thing. So, but obviously, if you are charging a fee, but you don't necessarily have a plan for those, then that's also got you have to think about that from the business's perspective as well, which is why we're trying to provide options also for reduced fees. But ultimately, this would be the business's funding to reinvest in those areas.
We have the economic development consulting contract underway, right?
We are actively in an RFP. We've received responses to that, which are currently going through the evaluation process.
So would we be able to kind of roll this into that, like have that activity also kind of evaluate maybe options for resuming, and who would run it?
Well, and I believe Mr. Ramberg and perhaps again, Mr. Wydans can help us with this, but the outgoing leadership of the PAD, I will never pronounce that correctly, Palo Alto Downtown Business and Professional Association, have been coordinating with the chamber on whether or not there's been a desire to potentially transfer management between the two.
Yeah, I guess I'm just asking because if we have this economic development work going on, it seems like that should be kind of dovetailed somewhat with this.
I think it is a dovetail to it, but that work is a one-time study, and ultimately a bid would be an ongoing management.
Okay. And Eric, see your hand.
Yeah, do you want to go to the, I want to ask a question, but it's not really technical. So do you want to go to the public first, or?
Sure. So again, if anybody'd like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. Yeah, Charlie.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the time tonight. So there's a few things. One, I absolutely agree with the staff report that the Chamber Board of Directors has been discussing the potential transition of the management, and we've been talking with Brad Ahikian about that. And so yes, the report is correct that the Chamber has been discussing that. But really, what we want you to consider right now is the fact that businesses are not fully recovered. There's a lot of anxiety, and we heard last night the anxiety over the street closures. They're not certain what that kind of an effect that's going to have. There's anxiety over the potential business tax coming through, the business license tax. There's anxiety over the park-let fees. So if you take the anxiety over the recovery and all of these other factors that are coming along in 2022, this just doesn't seem like the right time to add another fee being the for the bid. So I think we'd really like you to consider that. And so option 2, to put it on pause for a period of time, which would allow us to see the impacts of these other initiatives that are coming through, but it would also give the chamber a chance to work with Brad and with city staff on what the transition plan would look like. Some of the things that we've looked at and what our board is looking at is how would the contract be administered? How would it be regulated? How would we, go through the collection of fees? And on my end, I think most important, and to Vice Mayor Koo, what I think we have to define what the scope of the projects are going to be, and how is that going to benefit the businesses. What I've heard from them is, how is the bid assessment going to be an ROI for them? Are they going to see, are these events and activities and initiatives that would come through the bid assessment, how would that improve their business? How would it improve their sales? How would it improve people walking through their doors? So I think really what we would like to see you do is consider option 2. it gives a chance to put the assessment on hold while we see how these other initiatives are coming through. And it gives us a chance to work with you and with Brad and the former bid on how we can look at this transition and answer some of these questions. So again, I think we really, if we're going to put the assessment in, we have to give them an idea, the businesses, an idea of what the return on their investment is going to be. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. And I don't see any other hands up. So just come back to council and. Oh, there's Brad. Brad, go ahead.
Thank you everyone for tonight. I just want to be here to answer any questions you may have and just let you know that I support option number 2. For many of the reasons that Charlie just mentioned. You know, we're still dealing with a recovery here. We're trying to understand kind of the needs of our downtown. And I will say, many of you guys know Russ Cohen, who is the former executive director of the bid. Russ put a lot of sweat equity into this organization. We got a lot more out of Russ than we could have gotten with any other executive director. Our number one concern with Russ left was how do we fill that role, and an important role with somebody that actually cares about our downtown, that's going to put the effort into our downtown to really support the cleanliness, safety, and economic vitality of our downtown. One of the challenges that we had when we were kind of thinking about thinking of the pad of the bid was who's going to do this role. Now, obviously, you can go and outsource it to somebody who's just going to do the administration, or is it something that where we could partner with the chamber, someone who is connected to the business community, understands the needs, is involved in the listening to the voices of the businesses, which is a lot of what Russ did. He was out in the community. He was talking to the businesses. He was meeting the new retailers that came into town. Russ was the squeaky wheel when there's branches growing out of tree wells, when there's spray paint on the walls, when somebody spilled their ice cream on the street. It was more than just running an event. It was maintaining a downtown in a condition that people want to come to and be part of. So there was a lot of pride that went into that role. I think the chamber has what it takes. I know that we had some functional challenges within our organization. One of them being the biggest criticism that we always received was that majority of the funds went to an executive director. I think a lot of people didn't really understand what Russ really did. But like I said, he was the eyes and ears on our streets, and he was the first guy calling the public works when there was a problem. He was the first one calling meetings with the merchants. And like I said, I think the chamber has stepped up. I think this additional time would allow us to continue working with the chamber and staff to develop a new program with a clear vision that we believe the businesses can support. I'm here to answer any questions you may have, and thank you for your time.
All right, thanks for that. So go back to Eric, I guess, if you want to.
Yeah, so I mean, this is sort of my understanding of this, and I think we talked about this in the past, is that my understanding of the way that the bid works and so forth is that, the downtown businesses get together and think that and see that, there's some value in us having basically a combination of sort of mini trade association and pooling some resources to do marketing and outreach and other kind of stuff that makes sense for the downtown businesses. And so they assess, a small fee on themselves to fund this. And again, some went to Russ and, well worked with Russ and so forth. And I remember asking a couple of years ago, sounds real good, but why is the city involved, right? And the answer, well, there were a bunch of operational reasons that made sense. This is my recollection from that. So, okay. But if we're here in 2022 and the downtown businesses don't want to do it, then then we're sort of here to serve them, right? I mean, if they don't want to do it, then we shouldn't foist it on them. So if they don't want to do it, then I don't understand why we would pick any other option than option 2. So.
That was kind of my question. So, what is the downside of putting it on pause if the businesses aren't interested?
There isn't one. We can continue. We were just trying to proactively position the city and the organizations to continue to address the recovery. The bid is a useful tool, I think, for the business community to the extent they choose to and want to engage on it. Like Mr. Hikian noted, it takes work. It's not, it doesn't just magically happen. But ultimately, it is a tool that is to help provide and supplement services or that environment in that geo area. So if there isn't a desire, absolutely, we could put it on pause. I will say putting it on pause is probably a better recommendation than getting rid of it. Obviously, it does take a full vote if you were to dissolve it and then try and reestablish it at a later date. So recognizing COVID, just deciding that we want to put it on pause for another year and revisit is an appropriate policy call for the council to make.
I was just asking if that was what they wanted. Is that, were they leading towards dissolving it? But it was just a question.
Got it.
And
Aren't there some charter issues too, or something like that? I think there's some municipal law around it too, is my recollection. I'm not sure it's charter, but it's
Charter.
So you may be recalling,
an ordinance or something like that.
right, so there was an election and it is a legal structure. That is, I think, why the city's involved, because as a governmental agency, then there's an enforceable obligation to participate. And it allows the businesses to have that, to organize themselves, as opposed to being a totally voluntary annual activity. Councilmember Fulseth, you might be recalling me telling you that assessment district law has changed quite a bit since this bid was established. So it couldn't be established using the same somewhat streamlined steps that were used for this one. There would be additional steps and requirements to make this structure in the future.
That's an argument to maintain the structure, even if we don't operationally use it for the moment. Okay.
And then I noticed in one of the CMRs, I think it's 11219, there is an agreement between the city of Palo Alto and the Palo Alto Downtown Business and Professional Association entered into on June 25th, 2004. So there is an agreement here.
Yes, that's correct. There's a contract
Mhm.
by which they receive the funds and expend them. The city collects the funds and the city could choose a different contracting partner or expend the funds itself. I don't think anybody really has ever contemplated that, but all of those things would be legal.
I mean, I feel like this is something that they put together, the downtown businesses, to benefit them. So if they don't want it or to pause it.
So Brad and Charlie, I guess, like, and you guys have talked about this, but it sounds like you see value in it. Your intent would be to resume it at some point. You just want to pause it for now. Is that correct?
So I don't know if this is like a
You know,
free form.
so yes, what we, and again, I'm coming back to my discussion on working with the businesses to understand what is it that they really want to see from this assessment that supports their recovery and supports their, again, their return on the investment. And I think Brad and I have had conversations with them on, we have to almost put together that chart of work or that scope of work for them to see what we can do to support that.
Yeah, I'll just follow up and say, one of the more sensitive balancing acts that we did at the bid was understand that who our constituents were and are. And we were very sensitive when it came to doing major adjustments to the bid, which required us to go get a majority vote from our members. Things are like rate hiking our members or aggressively pursuing collections. And I will say that's something Russ spent a lot of time on, was just calling people, collecting money, because that was the softest approach. And the last thing we wanted was an uprising from the business community saying, hey, this isn't worth it. What are we getting out of this? So I think Charlie and I are on the same page with, we want to show the business community that we're coming to the table with something of value, that we think that they can get behind, where they think that this is actually going to benefit the downtown and the businesses. I think we can do it, but it's going to take some time. And I will say, this is maybe not for today's meeting, but it's not just a program. It's also working through some of the elements of the contract with the city. Because there's some elements in here that I think can be approved upon that can help make this program even better and stronger, right? And I don't think it's major changes, but I do think there were some of the changes that also inhibit us from, spending more of the money in the community. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So any council members want to make a motion?
Move option 2.
Second.
Okay, so that's the motion to just pause it. Direct staff to work with the chamber and the PAD BPA on the transfer of the bid management. Okay, let's go ahead and vote. Councilmember Filsa,
Yes.
Councilmember Koo,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. Okay, so that concludes our action item. So we have future meetings and agendas.
We do, thank you, Chair. Staff is working on, well, rather continuing to work on the business tax or potential business tax, and are trying to get to the Finance Committee for an update by March 15th. And then and that would be the only item on the March 15th agenda. After that, we have 2 fee studies coming up, one for planning and development services, one for libraries and community centers, and then ultimately rates. So we will have the formal review of the utility rates, and then ultimately the budget process coming up in May. So I think we've sent out some holds on everyone's calendars for the tentative cycle in May. So if you can all hold those dates, I think we're looking at around April 10th for the budget deliberations. And then we also left the May 3rd, the 2 May Tuesday evening meetings on folks' calendars, just in case items need to get deferred or we need to host something like further discussion on a business tax or something like that.
So has everybody seen that? Everybody good with the budget meeting times?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for accommodating some constraints I had.
No problem.
Hi, it's you.
So obviously, I think we're being fairly efficient. If there are any more items that need to be on the agenda, we're here to help.
Awesome. Thank you
All
all.
right. Okay, I think that's it. So that meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.